Lieutenant Commander Maya "Steady" Patel had always been the outlier in naval aviation. At 32, she'd completed more successful carrier landings than pilots with twice her experience, yet she'd never been one to command attention in the squadron. Ready room or boast about her achievements over drinks. While her fellow aviators executed flashy approaches and celebrated their daring recoveries, Maya meticulously studied carrier deck patterns until midnight and practiced emergency procedures in every possible weather condition until they became second nature. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The briefing room aboard the USS Nimitz hummed with the familiar pre-deployment energy. 60 naval aviators filled the space, their flight suits adorned with patches from various squadrons across the carrier air wing. The overhead screens displayed mission data for Operation Pacific Guardian, the largest naval exercise in the Western Pacific in a decade. Maya sat in her customary position, third row from the back, notebook open, pen poised. Captain James Harrison strode to the front, his presence immediately silencing the room. A former Blue Angels pilot with multiple combat deployments, Harrison had earned a reputation for demanding perfection and accepting nothing less. His gaze swept across the assembled aviators, lingering momentarily on faces he recognized as the squadron stars. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the main event," Harrison announced, his voice carrying throughout the room without effort. 4 carrier air wings, 12 allied nations, and 1 opportunity to demonstrate absolute dominance in maritime operations. The Joint Chiefs are watching. Pack 'em as watching screw this up, and you'll find yourselves flying cargo planes full of rubber dog crap out of Hong Kong. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Maya didn't join in. She'd already reviewed the exercise parameters 5 times, committed the weather forecast to memory, and calculated landing patterns for various wind conditions. This wasn't just another drill, this was a career-defining moment for everyone. "Aboard, primary landing signal officer assignments," Harrison continued, pointing to the main display. "Commander Jackson Quinn will handle the FA-18 Super Hornet squadrons during high-tempo recovery operations." Commander Quinn stood with a confident nod. At 38, he was everything Maya wasn't: loud, charismatic, and politically connected. He'd earned his call sign Quick Draw, not just for his rapid decision-making on the LSO platform, but for his ability to fast-track his way into prestigious assignments. "Roger that, Captain," Quinn said with practiced assurance. "We'll have birds on deck and clear for the next cycle before you can say check down." His comment earned appreciative nods from the younger pilots who admired his swagger. Harrison continued assigning positions. "Commander Ramirez will handle the E-2 Hawkeye and C-2 Greyhound recovery. Lieutenant Commander Thompson takes the EA-18 Growlers." Both officers acknowledged with professional nods and confident smiles. Maya waited patiently. She'd guided more difficult recoveries and hazardous conditions than anyone else in the room. She'd developed recovery techniques that Quinn was still trying to master. She'd written half the emergency procedures that the air wing now used as standard protocol. "Lieutenant Commander Patel," Harrison paused, finding Maya in the crowd, "you'll be handling the secondary recovery team. Backup LSO duties only. Stay off the primary platform unless specifically called in." The words landed like a punch to the stomach. Secondary recovery team, backup duties. In naval aviation, there was no clearer message: you're not essential. Several heads turned in her direction, expressions ranging from sympathy to barely concealed smirks. From somewhere in the second row, Maya heard a whispered comment just loud enough to reach nearby ears. "Guess they need someone to watch the ocean while the real LSOs work." Maya's pen continued moving across her notepad. She didn't look up, didn't allow her expression to change. But inside, something hardened like steel in seawater. She'd been landing aircraft on carriers for 11 years. She'd guided more successful night recoveries in rough seas than any LSO in the air wing. She'd never lost an aircraft, never had a serious incident, never failed to bring a pilot safely aboard. And now she was relegated to backup status. Any questions? Harrison asked, scanning the room. Maya could have raised her hand, could have asked why an LSO with her experience was being sidelined for an operation this critical, could have pointed out that her last 7 performance evaluations had been nothing short of exemplary. Instead, she closed her notebook and stood with the rest of the aviators when Harrison dismissed them. As the briefing room emptied, she caught fragments of conversation from the primary LSO team. Going to be a hell of a show tomorrow. Hope the Russians are watching. Heard Patel got bumped to babysitting duty. She walked out into the harsh Pacific sunlight, her boots making no sound on the non-skid deck. The flight deck stretched before her, a vast expanse of gray steel where dozens of aircraft were being prepared for the next day's operations. The LSO platform, her usual domain, was already being configured for the exercise, but not for her. For now, she was just another spectator. But as Maya approached the stern of the massive carrier, something shifted inside her. Not anger, not resentment, but a quiet, burning certainty. They thought she was too cautious, too methodical for their high-tempo operation. They were about to learn the difference between fast and ready. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The officers' wardroom aboard the Nimitz buzzed with pre-exercise energy that evening. Maya pushed through the doorway hoping to grab a quick coffee and retreat to her stateroom for final preparation. Instead, she walked into what felt like a private celebration to which she hadn't been invited. Commander Quinn held court at the center table, entertaining a group of junior officers with animated descriptions of carrier landings he'd supervised. His voice carried across the room with the ease of someone who had never questioned his place in the hierarchy. So there I am on the platform, winds gusting to 35 knots, Quinn was saying. And this rookie comes in hot, way too fast, drifting right. I key the radio and tell him, power, LEFTL, EFT. And just as he's about to go into the ramp, I wave him off. Saved both the pilot and a $70 million aircraft with 3 words. The table erupted in appreciative laughter. Maya recognized most of the faces: Ramirez, Thompson, and half a dozen pilots who'd been selected for tomorrow's primary demonstration flights. The inner circle, the ones who mattered. She moved toward the coffee station, hoping to remain unnoticed. But Quinn's voice followed her across the room. "Hey, Patel," he called out, not unkindly but with the casual dismissal of someone addressing a subordinate. "You getting ready for your watching brief tomorrow?" The conversation at his table died. Every eye in the room was now focused on her. Some curious, others uncomfortable, a few openly amused. "Just reviewing the exercise parameters," she replied evenly. "Same as everyone else." Right, Quinn nodded, a knowing smile spreading across his face. "Though I guess your parameters are a little different than ours. What's your call sign again?" "Steady?" More laughter followed, louder this time. "Steady," Quinn repeated, as if tasting the word. "Yeah, that fits. Steady as in careful, methodical. Takes her time with everything." He paused for effect. "Of course, tomorrow's operation is all about tempo. 4 recovery cycles in 6 hours. Can't afford to have anyone holding up the pattern." The implication hung in the air like jet exhaust. Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks, but her voice remained level. "Speed without precision is just chaos," she said quietly. "Precision without speed is just... well, it's why you're flying back up tomorrow instead of lead." Quinn shrugged. The room went silent. Maya could hear the distant hum of the carriers. Engines, the muffled announcements over the 1MC, her own heartbeat in her ears. Everyone was watching, waiting to see how she'd respond to having her professional competence questioned in front of half the air wing. She could have walked away, should have, probably. Instead, she stepped closer to Quinn's table. "You know what's interesting about backup positions?" she said conversationally. "They only matter when the primary fails." Quinn's smile faltered. "Slightly. Primary is not going to fail, Patel. That's why they call it primary." "Right," Maya nodded. "Because nothing ever goes wrong in naval aviation." She let that sink in for a moment. "Good luck tomorrow, Jackson. Hope you never need that backup." She turned and walked out, leaving her coffee untouched. Behind her, she heard the conversation restart in hushed tones, but the easy camaraderie was gone. Outside, the ocean air was cooling as the sun set behind a bank of gathering clouds. Maya walked across the flight deck toward her stateroom, but her path took her past the LSO platform where tomorrow's critical operations would be conducted. The platform itself jutted out from the port side of the ship, offering the landing signal officers the best possible view of approaching aircraft. As she approached, she noticed something that made her stop. CapCut AI Voice Ready Text Chief Petty Officer Elena Martinez, the Air Wing's most experienced LSO supervisor, was inspecting the platform's communications equipment. Elena had 25 years in the Navy and a reputation for knowing carrier operations better than the officers who commanded them. "Evening, ma'am," Elena said without looking up. "Just double-checking the backup systems for tomorrow's recovery operations." "Problems?" Maya asked. Elena straightened, wiping her hands on a rag. "No, ma'am. Opposite, actually. This platform's dialed in perfectly. Best come setup I've seen in years." She paused, studying Maya's face in the gathering darkness. "Heard about tomorrow's assignments?" Maya said nothing, but Elena nodded as if she'd spoken anyway. "Been serving on carriers since before most of these hotshots could spell aviation," she continued. "Seen all kinds come and go. The flashy ones, the quiet ones, the ones who think they're God's gift to the Navy." She gestured toward the LSO platform, the small space from which landing signal officers guided pilots to safe recoveries on the dangerous carrier deck. "But when things go sideways, when the deck's pitching and the ceiling's dropping and lives are on the line, you know who I want on that platform?" "Who?" Maya asked quietly. Elena looked her straight in the eye. "The LSO who inspects her equipment 3 times instead of once. The one who studies weather patterns from 6 different sources. The one who practices emergency recovery procedures until she can run them in her sleep." She tapped the side of the platform. "The one who treats every landing like it matters." Maya felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. "Tomorrow's forecast is looking rough," Elena continued, glancing toward the horizon where dark clouds were gathering. "Pacific's churning up some weather that could make things interesting. Primary teams might find out that quick hands don't mean much when you're trying to recover aircraft in 40-knot crosswinds with a pitching deck." She handed Maya a communication check sheet, signed and certified. "She's ready when you are, ma'am. And between you and me," she lowered her voice, "I'd rather have you on this platform than some of these cowboys who think carrier landings are about style points." As Elena walked away, Maya stood alone beside the LSO platform. The carrier looked different in the fading light, not a stage for glory seekers, but a dangerous, unforgiving environment where lives depended on the skills of those guiding the aircraft home. She climbed onto the platform and stood in the LSO's position, running through her mental checklist one more time. Tomorrow she'd be watching from the sidelines, non-essential, expected to observe while others took the credit. But she'd be ready. And in naval aviation, being ready was everything. Maya woke at 4:30 a.m., 2 hours before her scheduled brief. The carrier was already alive with pre-dawn activity, but she'd learned long ago That success belonged to those who prepared while others slept. She'd spent the night reviewing weather data, and what she'd found troubled her deeply. A massive storm system was moving across the western Pacific faster than the meteorologists had predicted. By noon, when the high-tempo recovery operations were scheduled to begin, they'd be recovering aircraft in conditions that would challenge even the most experienced landing signal officers. She dressed quickly and made her way to the carrier's Combat Direction Center, expecting to find it staffed only by the watch team. Instead, she discovered Captain Harrison hunched over a bank of weather monitors, his usually immaculate uniform showing signs of a sleepless night. "Lieutenant Commander Patel," he said without looking up, "you're up early." Reviewing the forecast. "Sir, the conditions for recovery operations are going to be extremely challenging." Harrison finally turned to face her, and Maya was surprised to see genuine concern in his eyes. "How challenging?" Maya moved to the display, pointing to the swirling mass of red and orange that dominated the screen. Sustained winds at 45 knots gusting to 65, visibility down to half a mile in precipitation. Deck motion predictions show up to 15-degree pitches. Wave heights increasing to 20 to 25 feet. She paused. "Sir, this is beyond the safety parameters for standard recovery operations." "The exercise is too important to scrub," Harrison said firmly. "PACOM has been planning this for months. We've got representatives from 12 allied nations, media coverage, congressional observers." He trailed off, studying the weather data. "What about a delay?" Maya suggested. "Wait for the system to pass. Exercise window closes at 1800 hours. It's now or next quarter." Harrison straightened his shoulders, the momentary uncertainty vanishing behind his command presence. "We fly the mission as planned." 2 hours later, the full briefing room felt different. The easy confidence from the night before had been replaced by a tense professionalism. Everyone had seen the weather reports by now. Commander Quinn still sat in the front row, but his usual swagger had been tempered by the reality of what they were facing. When Harrison called out the assignments, unchanged from the previous day, Quinn's acknowledgement lacked its typical bravado. "Weather brief," announced Commander Sarah Chun, the carrier's senior meteorologist. The main screen filled with satellite imagery that looked like an angry red spiral covering a third of the western Pacific. "Ladies and gentlemen, today's conditions. We'll test every skill you've developed as naval aviators." Maya listened intently as Chun outlined wind patterns, precipitation levels, and visibility forecasts. She'd already memorized most of it, but hearing it presented to the full air wing drove home just how dangerous these recovery operations would become. "Primary concern is deck motion and severe crosswinds," Chun continued. "Maintaining a stable approach will require constant adjustments from both pilots and LSOs. Any aircraft experiencing difficulty should immediately be waved off and directed to the holding pattern until conditions improve or divert options are implemented." After the brief, as crews filed out toward their stations, Maya overheard a conversation between two FA-18 pilots that made her blood run cold. "Think Quinn can handle those conditions?" one asked quietly. "He's never run recovery ops in weather this rough," the other replied. "None of the primary LSO team has." Maya quickened her pace, catching up with Chief Martinez near the equipment. "Lockers. Elena, I need to ask you something." "Shoot, ma'am." "How many of our LSOs have experience with recovery operations in severe weather conditions?" Elena's expression grew serious. "Real-world experience? Maybe 4 or 5 officers in the entire air wing. Most have only done it in simulators." "What about emergency divert procedures?" "That's even worse. We haven't had a real emergency divert situation in over 3 years. Most LSOs have never handled one outside of training." A cold certainty settled in Maya's stomach. She was watching a disaster in the making, inexperienced LSOs guiding pilots into conditions that would challenge veterans with backup procedures. They'd barely practiced. She found Harrison on the flag bridge, surrounded by monitors showing aircraft positions and weather updates. "Sir, request permission to speak freely." Harrison looked up from his displays. "Go ahead, Lieutenant Commander." "I think we need to reconsider the LSO assignments. The weather conditions are beyond what most of our primary team has experienced in actual operations. Commander Quinn and his team are fully qualified for this mission." "Simulator qualified, yes, sir. But they've never executed recovery operations. In conditions like these with actual aircraft and real consequences." Harrison's expression hardened. "Are you questioning my judgment, Lieutenant Commander?" Maya felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She could back down, accept the assignments as given, and pray that everything went according to plan. Or she could push forward, knowing it might end her career. "Sir, I've supervised carrier landings in the Western Pacific for 9 years. I've executed successful recovery operations in conditions very similar to what we're facing today. My experience with emergency procedures exceeds that of any other LSO team in the air wing." "You're assigned to backup, Lieutenant Commander." "That's final." Maya nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. But when those primary teams run into trouble, and they will, I'll be ready." Harrison stared at her for a long moment. "That's a hell of a thing to say about your fellow officers." "It's not about them, sir. It's about the mission. And the mission requires someone who can deliver when everything goes wrong." As Maya walked toward her station, she felt the eyes of the entire air wing on her. Word of her conversation with Harrison had already started to spread. The backup ELEA, who thought she was better than the primary teams. Let them talk, she thought. In 3 hours, when they were fighting to recover aircraft in a Pacific storm, talk would be the last thing on anyone's mind. Her assigned position on the secondary LSO platform felt isolated and removed from the action. But as she took her place, checking her equipment one final time, she knew that when the moment came, and it would come, she would be ready. The Western Pacific at 30,000 feet was a canvas of violent gray. Maya held her position on the secondary LSO platform, the wind and rain lashing against her as she monitored the primary recovery operations through both visual observation and radar feeds. Through her headset, she could hear the strain in Commander Quinn's voice as he struggled to guide the first group of FA-18 Super Hornets onto the heaving deck. The weather had exceeded even the most pessimistic forecasts. Crosswinds were battering the incoming aircraft like toys, and visibility had dropped to near zero. The carrier itself was pitching dramatically, its massive hull fighting against waves that seemed determined to swallow it whole. "Tomcat 307, this is Nimitz LSO," came Quinn's tight voice over the tactical frequency. "You're drifting left. Power up. Power up." Maya watched her displays, noting the approach path deviations and wind direction shifts that preceded the worst turbulence. She'd seen these patterns before during typhoon evacuation operations 2 years ago, the kind of conditions that could turn routine landings into fatal mistakes in seconds. "Tomcat 307, wave off, wave off." Quinn's voice cracked with urgency. "Too much drift. Come around for another approach." The tactical frequency erupted in controlled chaos. Multiple aircraft were reporting difficulties, severe turbulence, visibility issues, and fuel concerns brought on by repeated wave-offs. Maya listened with growing alarm as the carefully planned recovery pattern began to disintegrate. "Bridge, this is primary LSO." Quinn's voice was strained now, the cocky confidence completely gone. "Requesting permission to suspend recovery operations. Conditions are beyond safe operational parameters." There was a long pause before Captain Harrison's voice came through the command frequency. "Primary LSO, negative on suspension. We have allied observers and congressional oversight. Recovery operations must continue." Maya felt her hands tighten on her equipment. She keyed her radio. "Bridge, this is secondary LSO. I'm monitoring. Primary frequency. Recommend immediate operational reassessment. Secondary LSO, maintain radio silence unless directly addressed, came Harrison's sharp reply. But Maya could see what the controllers on the bridge couldn't. The storm was intensifying faster than anyone had predicted. The primary recovery corridor was becoming a death trap, and they were ordering good pilots to fly into it. Nimitz, this is Viper 425. A new voice cut through the static. Fuel state critical. If I don't get aboard in the next 10 minutes, I'll have to divert to Guam. Roger, 425. Moving to priority recovery, Quinn replied. Maya watched her radar screen as the FA-18 maneuvered toward the carrier's stern. Through the technical chatter, she could hear the strain in both voices as they fought to coordinate a landing in conditions that were testing the limits of both aircraft and crew. Then everything went wrong at once. Bridge, I've lost visual reference with incoming aircraft. Quinn's voice cracked with panic. Cannot maintain proper guidance. Request immediate backup, LSO assistance. The tactical frequency exploded with urgent communications. Without proper visual guidance, Quinn couldn't safely bring the aircraft aboard. The FA-18 was running dangerously low on fuel. The backup teams were supposed to be ready, but no one had anticipated conditions this severe. Bridge, this is primary LSO. I am unable to continue effective recovery operations. Requesting relief. Negative primary LSO. Maintain position, came the reply from the bridge. We're working alternatives. But Maya could see the radar tracks of several aircraft beginning to enter holding patterns, burning precious fuel while the controllers tried to salvage the operation. Two had already diverted toward Guam, their fuel states too critical to wait for a solution. She made her decision. Bridge, this is secondary LSO, Lieutenant Commander Patel. Maya's voice cut through the chaos with calm authority. I am taking primary recovery control. I can handle these aircraft. Secondary LSO, you are not authorized. Sir, with respect, she interrupted. Something she'd never done before. Those pilots are going to run out of fuel if someone doesn't get them. Aboard in the next 20 minutes. I'm already in position. I have visual tracking despite the conditions, and I've landed aircraft in worse. There was a long pause. Maya could imagine the frantic discussions taking place on the bridge, weighing political considerations against the lives of the pilots circling in a Pacific storm with dwindling fuel. Finally, Harrison's voice came through. Secondary LSO, you are cleared to take primary recovery control. God help us all. Maya immediately switched her communications to the main recovery frequency. All aircraft in the pattern. This is Lieutenant Commander Patel, taking primary LSO duties. Form up according to fuel state priority. Let's get you home. Behind her, the mission that was supposed to showcase American naval power to the world had collapsed into chaos. Ahead of her lay the most challenging recovery operations of her career, but she was ready. She'd been ready all along. Viper 425, this is LSO Patel. You're first up. Report fuel state. LSO, Viper 425. 7 minutes of fuel remaining. Copy 425. Your priority 1. I need you to trust my instructions exactly. These conditions are challenging but manageable. The first FA-18 appeared through the gray mist like a ghost, its sleek form materializing just off the carrier's stern. The fighter was being hammered by turbulence, its pilot fighting to maintain even a basic approach as crosswinds tried to push the aircraft off course. 425, I have you visual, Maya said, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. Your approach is offset by 12 degrees due to crosswind. I need you to add 3 degrees right rudder and maintain current power. Through her headset, she could hear the skepticism from the bridge. Someone she couldn't identify muttered, too conservative. This guy doesn't have fuel for a textbook approach. But Maya knew something the others didn't. In conditions like these, Russian got people killed. A carrier landing required millimeter precision at 150 knots, with an aircraft being thrown around by forces that could crush metal. Trying to hurry the process was like trying to thread a needle during an earthquake. 425, looking good. Maintain current approach. Wind gusting from your right in 3, 2, 1, add power now. The FA-18 responded perfectly to her guidance, compensating for the wind shear that was trying to push it off the center line. This was where 9 years of experience made the difference. She could feel the storm's patterns through the aircrafts. Responses, anticipating the next gust before it hit. 425, you're lined up. Deck moving up, wait for it. Now reduce power 15%. The timing had to be perfect. The carrier deck was pitching up to 15 degrees, creating a moving target for the incoming aircraft. Too early, and the fighter would slam into the stern. Too late, and it would miss the arresting wires entirely. Call the ball, Maya instructed, using the traditional terminology for when a pilot confirms visual contact with the landing guidance system. 425 Hornet, ball 6.0, came the terse reply, indicating the pilot could see the landing guidance and had 6,000 pounds of fuel remaining, barely enough for one approach. Roger, ball, you're high, ease it down. Wind steady for the moment. Deck coming up to meet you. Maya watched as the FA-18 descended toward the heaving flight deck, its approach more stable than she'd expected given the conditions. The pilot was good, responding precisely to her instructions. Little power, good, right for lineup, steady. Steady, cut now. The FA-18 dropped onto the deck just as a massive wave lifted the carrier's stern. The fighter's tailhook caught the third wire, snapping the aircraft to a halt in a shower of sparks. Perfect. Trap, called the deck officer over the frequency. Wire 3. 425, welcome aboard Nimitz, Maya said, already shifting her attention. To the next aircraft. Clear the landing area expeditiously. The first recovery took 8 minutes instead of the normal 2, but Maya never wavered. She held her focus through wind gusts that threatened to blow her off the platform, making constant micro-adjustments to her guidance to keep the approaching aircraft safe. Viper 418, you're next. Report fuel state. LSO 418, 8 minutes. Remaining. Copy 418, I have you visual. Your approach is good, but you'll hit turbulence at 3/4 of a mile. Be ready to add power. The second recovery was even more challenging. The storm had intensified, and the pilot was clearly struggling with fatigue and stress. Maya watched the Super Hornets approach, noting every deviation, every correction, guiding the aircraft with a precision born of thousands of hours on the platform. Bridge, this is LSO Patel, she transmitted during a brief lull. 2 recoveries. Complete. 6 aircraft remaining in primary pattern. Request status update on diverted aircraft. LSO Bridge. 2 aircraft successfully diverted to Guam. 4 additional aircraft holding at Angels 10 awaiting recovery clearance. How are you holding up? Maya glanced at her equipment. The driving rain had soaked her to the skin, and the wind was so strong. She had to brace herself against the platform railing. But her focus remained absolute. I'm good, Bridge. Let's finish this. The third FA-18 approached with mechanical problems compounding the weather difficulties. Its pilot reported intermittent avionics issues, making instrument approaches nearly impossible. Viper 412, I need you to trust me completely, Maya transmitted. I'm going to do something that's not in the book, but it's going to work. Instead of the standard approach, Maya guided the aircraft into a slightly steeper angle, using the fighter's momentum and careful timing to create a more stable approach path. Officially approved but highly effective in extreme conditions. Trap, called the deck officer as the fighter slammed onto the deck and caught the second wire. Wire 2. In the bridge, Maya could hear excited chatter as officers realized what she'd done. Someone said, "Did she just invent a new approach procedure?" The fourth aircraft was in the worst shape. Its pilot was clearly exhausted, flying on pure adrenaline and fumes. His approach was erratic, his radio calls increasingly terse. "Viper. 409, take your time," Maya said gently. "We've got this figured out now." It was a necessary confidence-building statement. The pilot was running dangerously low on fuel, but he needed reassurance more than urgency. "Can't hold steady," came the strained reply. "Aircraft feels sluggish. I don't think I can do this." "Yes, you can," Maya said firmly. "Trust your training and trust me. I'm going to bring you home." She used every technique she'd learned in 11 years of guiding carrier landings, creating the most stable approach possible despite the storm's fury. When the FA-18 finally slammed onto the deck and caught the arresting wire, there was an audible sigh of relief over the radio. All aircraft, Maya announced as the recovery operations continued. "This is LSO Patel. We have established a successful recovery pattern despite current conditions. Maintain standard holding and approach as directed." Over the next 2 hours, Maya guided 17 more aircraft safely onto the carrier deck. Each landing was a battle against the elements, but her calm voice and precise instructions never wavered. By the time the last fighter touched down, the storm had begun to ease slightly, though conditions remained far outside normal safety parameters. "Nimitz, this is Viper lead," came a voice over the tactical frequency as the final aircraft taxied clear of the landing area. "I don't know what we did to deserve an LSO like Lieutenant Commander Patel, but every pilot in this air wing owes her their lives today." As Maya finally stepped down from the LSO platform, soaked to the skin and exhausted beyond measure, she could hear the chatter on the tactical frequency changing. Word was spreading throughout the entire carrier battle group about what had just happened, about the backup LSO who had saved a mission that everyone else had given up on. But for Maya, there was no sense of triumph, no desire for recognition. She'd simply done what needed to be done, exactly when it needed to be done. It was what she'd been training for her entire career. The recovery operation that should have been a showcase of American naval power had nearly become a disaster. Instead, thanks to one officer's skill and preparation, it had become a masterclass in naval aviation excellence. Chief Martinez intercepted Maya as she made her way below decks, offering a towel and a steaming cup of coffee. "Knew you'd pull it off," Elena said, her voice filled with quiet pride. 17 perfect recoveries in those conditions. "Never seen anything like it." Maya accepted the coffee gratefully. "The pilots did the hard part. I just gave them a steady voice to follow." Elena shook her head. "That's not how they're telling it, ma'am. Word's already spreading throughout the fleet. They're calling it the Hurricane Recovery. Going to be teaching this one at Pensacola for years." As Maya toweled her hair dry, Captain Harrison approached, his expression a mixture of relief and genuine humility. "Lieutenant Commander Patel," he said formally, "the Air Wing owes you a debt that can't be repaid." Maya started to dismiss the praise, but Harrison held up his hand. "No, you need to hear this. What you did today wasn't just exceptional LSO work. It was exceptional leadership. You saw what needed to be done and did it, regardless of your assigned role or the potential career consequences." He gestured toward a group of pilots who had gathered nearby, still in their flight gear. "Those aviators are alive because you were ready when no one else was. That matters more than any exercise or demonstration." One of the FA-18 pilots, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chun Viper 425, the first recovery, stepped forward. "Commander Patel," Chun said, extending her hand, "I wanted to thank you personally. What you did up there." She paused, emotion making her voice unsteady. I've got twin boys at home. They get to see their mom tonight because of your skill and courage. Similar testimonials followed from the other pilots. Each story drove home the same point. Maya's actions hadn't just saved a mission, they'd saved lives. Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, one of the flight deck crew who had worked the recoveries, was surrounded by his own group of admirers. I've been on flight decks for 15 years, he was telling anyone who would listen. I've never seen anything like what Commander Patel did today. She was calling wind shifts before they registered on the instruments, timing deck movements. Like she could see the future. Made the impossible look routine. But not everyone was celebrating. Maya noticed a small group of officers standing apart from the main crowd, their expressions troubled. She recognized them as part of the carrier's leadership team, people who had to explain to their superiors how a mission with such high visibility had nearly ended in disaster. Commander Eliza Wong, the Air Wing Operations Officer, approached Maya with a tablet and a concerned expression. Lieutenant Commander, I need to ask you some questions about today's operations, Wong said. There's going to be an investigation into what went wrong with the primary recovery team. Maya nodded. She'd expected this. Of course, ma'am. When? Do you need my statement? Now, if possible. Captain Harrison wants a preliminary report within the hour. As they walked toward the operations center, Wong continued. I have to ask, did you observe any specific training deficiencies or procedural violations that contributed to today's problems? It was a loaded question. Maya's answer could determine the fate of several careers, including Commander Quinn's. She could point out that the primary team had been undertrained for the conditions they faced, that the mission should have been delayed or canceled, that politics had been prioritized over safety. Instead, she said, Ma'am, the weather conditions today exceeded anything we'd trained for. Every officer performed to the best of their abilities under extremely challenging circumstances. Wong looked surprised. But surely you observed some factors that led to the primary team's inability to continue operations? I didn't observe a failure, Maya replied carefully. I observed a mission that required adaptation. The primary team encountered conditions beyond their training and experience. When that happened, the system worked exactly as designed. Backup resources were activated to complete the objective. It was a diplomatic answer that protected her fellow officers while acknowledging the reality of what had happened. Wong made notes on her tablet, but Maya could see she was still troubled. Commander, off the record, do you think today's LSO assignments were appropriate? Maya stopped walking and looked directly at Wong. Ma'am, I think every officer in this air wing is committed to completing the mission and bringing everyone home safely. Sometimes that means acknowledging that experience and specific training matter more than standard rotations or traditional assignments. The implication was clear without being insubordinate. Wong nodded slowly. One more question. Would you be willing to take on additional responsibilities? Perhaps leading a specialized training program for extreme weather recovery operations? Maya considered the offer. It was recognition of her expertise, a chance to ensure that future teams would be better prepared for conditions like they'd faced today. But it also meant stepping into the spotlight, accepting a visibility that she'd never sought. Yes, ma'am, she said finally. If it helps prevent what happened today from happening again. As they reached the operations center, Maya could see through the windows that the celebration on the flight deck was continuing. Her fellow officers were still processing what had happened, still trying to understand how the quiet lieutenant commander they'd overlooked had become the hero of the day. But Maya understood something they didn't yet grasp. Today hadn't been about heroics or recognition. It had been about preparation meeting opportunity, about years of quiet professionalism paying off when it mattered most. She'd been ready when others weren't, and that had made all the difference. In the days that followed, as the carrier battle group continued its deployment, Maya noticed subtle but significant changes in how she was perceived. The smirks and dismissive comments had disappeared, replaced by respectful nods and attentive faces whenever she spoke. Commander Quinn had been reassigned to shore duty, ostensibly for advanced training, though everyone understood the real reason. Captain Harrison had personally recommended Maya for promotion to full commander, with an accompanying Navy Achievement Medal for her actions during the storm. The citation read, "For exceptional professional achievement in the superior performance of her duties," but the informal name for the award had already spread throughout the fleet, the Hurricane Recovery Medal. The investigation began 7 days later in Conference Room B of the USS Nimitz's administrative section. Maya sat at a polished table facing a panel of 5 senior officers: Rear Admiral Victoria Hayes from Naval Air Forces Pacific, Captain James Morrison from the Inspector General's office, Captain Harrison, and 2 other senior commanders from different carrier groups who had been brought in for impartiality. Rear Admiral Hayes, a formidable woman, in her late 50s with steel-gray hair and 4 rows of service ribbons, opened the questioning. Lieutenant Commander Patel, we've reviewed the recovery recordings, meteorological data, and interviewed all personnel involved. Your actions during Operation Pacific Guardian were nothing short of remarkable, but we need to understand how standard operational protocols failed so completely under pressure. Maya had spent the past week reviewing every detail of the operation. Anticipating this moment, she knew that careers hung in the balance, not just her own, but those of officers who had trained alongside her for years. "Ma'am, I believe the primary issue was an insufficient emphasis on real-world experience in extreme weather conditions," Maya began carefully. "Our LSO teams were qualified for standard recovery operations, but the weather pattern that developed exceeded all predicted parameters and previous training scenarios." Captain Morrison leaned forward, consulting his notes. "Commander, our records show you specifically warned about potential hazards based on weather forecasts and suggested a reassignment of duties. Can you elaborate on that conversation?" This was dangerous territory. Maya's answer could implicate Captain Harrison in poor decision-making or reveal the political pressures that had driven the mission forward despite safety concerns. "Sir, I expressed concern about the deteriorating weather conditions and suggested that LSO assignments should prioritize officers with documented experience in severe sea state operations." Captain Harrison appropriately considered all factors, including the strategic importance of the mission and the established duty rotation. Admiral Hayes's expression suggested she wasn't buying the diplomatic answer. "Commander, we have reports that you specifically questioned the capabilities of the primary LSO team. Is that accurate?" Maya took a breath. The truth was complicated, but these officers deserved honesty. "Ma'am, I suggested that experience with actual severe weather operations should be a priority factor in LSO selection. Several officers, including myself, had extensive real-world experience with the type of conditions forecasted. Others had primarily simulator experience." "And how did Captain Harrison respond to that suggestion?" "He maintained the original assignments and reminded me that Commander Quinn and his team were fully qualified for the mission." Captain Morrison made a note, which technically they were. All primary LSOs met the regulatory requirements for the operation. "Yes, sir. But there's a difference between meeting minimum qualifications and being fully prepared for conditions that push beyond standard parameters." The questioning continued for 3 hours, covering every aspect of the mission from initial planning to final recovery. Maya answered truthfully but carefully, protecting her fellow officers while ensuring the investigators understood the systemic issues that had led to the near disaster. Finally, Admiral Hayes asked the question Maya had been dreading. "Commander, in your professional opinion, was this mission properly planned and executed?" Maya looked around the table, meeting each officer's eyes in turn. These were experienced naval aviators who understood the difference between political necessity and operational reality. Ma'am, the mission was planned according to established procedures and executed by dedicated professionals doing their best under extremely challenging conditions. However, I believe we can improve our operational readiness by implementing several changes. LSO selection should heavily weight demonstrated performance in adverse conditions. Weather assessment protocols should be more conservative when multiple allied nations are participating. And emergency recovery procedures should be regularly practiced in realistic conditions, not just reviewed in briefings. Admiral Hayes nodded slowly. Commander, one final question. If you were planning this mission again, what would you do differently? Maya had considered this question during 3 sleepless nights. The honest answer might end careers, but anything less would dishonor the pilots who had trusted her with their lives. Ma'am, I would delay the mission until weather conditions improved, regardless of political considerations or visibility. No demonstration, no matter how strategically important, is worth risking the lives of pilots and aircraft. The room fell silent. Captain Harrison's face was tense, but he nodded slightly, an acknowledgement that she was right, even if it reflected poorly on his decision-making. Thank you, Commander, Admiral Hayes said finally. Your honesty is appreciated. You're dismissed. As Maya stood to leave, Captain Morrison spoke up. Commander, off the record, how do you think this incident should be handled going forward? Maya paused at the door. Sir, I think we should focus on learning from what happened rather than assigning blame. Every officer involved was trying to complete the mission safely. The system failed them, not the other way around. Outside the conference room, Maya found Commander Quinn waiting in the passageway. He looked like he'd aged years in a week, his usual confidence replaced by genuine humility. Patel, he said quietly, I wanted to thank you for what you did out there. You would have done the same thing. He shook his head. No, I wouldn't have. I wasn't ready for conditions like that. I'm not sure I ever would have been. He paused, looking directly at her for perhaps the first time without condescension or competition. I heard they're offering you leadership of the new extreme weather recovery program. You should take it. Why? Because you understand something the rest of us are still learning. Being the best LSO isn't about being the fastest to make a call or the most aggressive in your guidance. It's about being ready when everyone else isn't. As Quinn walked away, Maya realized that the investigation had accomplished something more important than determining blame. It had forced everyone involved to confront the difference between appearance and substance, between confidence and competence. The mission had been saved not through political maneuvering or procedural compliance, but through old-fashioned preparation and skill. And maybe, just maybe, that lesson would stick long enough to prevent the next crisis. 3 weeks later, Maya found herself in an unexpected position standing before the assembled LSOs of Carrier Wing 8 aboard the USS Nimitz. The ship was currently docked at Naval Base Yokosuka, Japan, for a brief port call before continuing deployment. The Advanced Weather Recovery Training Program begins today, she announced to the 30 officers seated before her. What we're developing here isn't just a new set of procedures. It's a new way of thinking about carrier operations in extreme conditions. Among the faces looking back at her were several who had once dismissed her methodical approach. Now they were here to learn from her, their expressions attentive and respectful. Over the next 8 weeks, we'll be conducting the most realistic training scenarios ever developed for carrier landing operations. You'll face conditions in simulators that match what we encountered during the hurricane recovery, and then we'll gradually implement modified live training as weather permits. Lieutenant Jessica Rivera, a junior LSO who had once been Quinn's protege, raised her hand. Commander, how do we prepare for conditions we've never experienced? The simulators can only do so much. It was an excellent question, the kind that showed real engagement with the challenge. You start by recognizing that carrier operations always exist on the edge of what's possible, Maya replied. Every landing is a controlled emergency. When conditions deteriorate, the margin for error doesn't just shrink, it disappears entirely. She pulled up a video on the main screen, showing footage from the hurricane recovery operations. The officers watched in silence as aircraft were tossed around by winds, the carrier deck pitching violently. This isn't about being heroic or exceptional. It's about being so thoroughly prepared that when faced with the impossible, you have options others don't see. It's about training your instincts to recognize patterns in chaos. After the briefing, Maya walked across the flight deck toward the LSO platform where the first practical training session would take place. The carrier was securely docked, but the platform would be used for observational training before they returned to sea. Chief Martinez fell into step beside her, carrying the updated communications equipment that would be part of the new training. Protocol. Never thought I'd see the day, Elena commented. Half those officers used to roll their eyes whenever you suggested more practice for emergency procedures. Maya smiled slightly. People change when they see results. It's more than that, Elena said. You've changed something fundamental in how this air wing operates. Before, it was all about looking good, sounding confident. Now they're actually focused on being good. As they reached the LSO platform, Maya noticed someone had attached a small brass plaque to the railing. It reads simply, "Steady as she goes Hurricane Recovery Platform." Captain Harrison had it installed yesterday. Elena explained. Said it was to remind everyone what really matters. Admiral Hayes replied without hesitation. Whatever you need. The next 24 hours were a blur of activity. Maya assembled a team of the most experienced pilots and LSOs from across the battle group, focusing not on rank or position, but on demonstrated ability in adverse conditions. This mission will push beyond anything we've trained for, she told the assembled aviators. But the principles remain the same: preparation, precision, and adaptability when conditions deteriorate beyond expectations. She divided the evacuation into 3 phases, assigning specific teams to each hospital location and establishing clear communications protocols that could function, even if primary systems failed. We'll be operating in conditions that the manual says are impossible, she told them. But we're going to do it anyway because there are people counting on us. Lieutenant Rivera approached her after the briefing. Commander, I've been running the calculations. The wind speeds at Hospital Site Bravo will exceed safe operational limits for the MH-60 helicopters by almost 30%. Maya nodded. I know. That's why we're modifying the approach procedures. We'll use the terrain features east of the hospital to create a wind shadow for final approach. It's not in any manual, but I've used similar techniques during relief operations after Typhoon Malakas. Rivera looked skeptical. With all due respect, Commander, that sounds impossible. Maya smiled slightly. 6 months ago they said the same thing about recovering aircraft in a hurricane. Sometimes the impossible just takes a little longer. As the battle group steamed at flank speed toward the Philippines, Maya worked through the night, refining procedures and contingency plans. Every possible failure point, every potential complication had to be anticipated and addressed. There would be no second chances. At 0400, Captain Harrison found her still working in the operations center, surrounded by weather charts and evacuation plans. You should get some rest, Commander, he said gently. Tomorrow's going to be the most challenging day of your career. Maya looked up from her calculations. I will, sir. Just need to finish these approach patterns for Hospital Site Charlie. The surrounding mountains create some unusual wind patterns that the pilots need to be aware of. Harrison studied her for a moment. You know, when I first assigned you to backup LSO duty all those months ago, I thought I was making the right call. Quinn had all the right qualifications on paper, all the confidence, all the political connections. He was a good officer, Maya said diplomatically. He was, but he wasn't ready when it mattered most. Harrison paused. You were. And now hundreds of lives depend on that same readiness. We'll be ready, sir, all of us. The first sign of Typhoon Mikasa appeared at dawn, a wall of dark. Clouds on the eastern horizon, steadily growing as the carrier battle group approached the Philippines. By mid-morning, the sea had transformed from placid blue to angry gray, with whitecaps growing into substantial swells. Maya stood on the flag bridge, watching the storms approach while final preparations were made for the evacuation operation. The first helicopters were being positioned on the flight deck, their crews conducting last-minute equipment checks. Admiral Hayes joined her, studying the same ominous horizon. Weather Service just upgraded Mikasa to a Category 5, she said, without preamble. Sustained winds at 155 knots near the center. We're going to be operating in Category 3 conditions at the evacuation sites. Maya nodded, processing this new information. We've planned for Category 3. The modified approach patterns should still work, though we'll need to reduce passenger loads by 30% to maintain safety margins. Hayes looked at her appraisingly. Most officers would be recommending we abort the mission with these forecasts. The hospitals are in the direct path of a Category 5 typhoon, ma'am. If we don't get those patients out, many of them won't survive. And if we lose aircraft trying? Maya met the Admiral's gaze steadily. We won't. Every pilot has been briefed on the exact conditions they'll face. Every approach has been calculated to use the terrain for maximum protection. And every aircraft has triple redundant communications. We've prepared for this. Hayes nodded slowly. Very well, Commander. Operation Steadfast Mercy is go. May God be with you all. At 1,100 hours, the first wave of helicopters launched from the Nimitz and its escort vessels. Maya coordinated. From the carrier's Combat Direction Center, monitoring communications and weather data from all 3 hospital sites. Mercy Flight, this is Nimitz Control, she transmitted to the lead helicopter. Typhoon has accelerated. You'll be experiencing 60-knot gusts at Hospital Site Alpha within 30 minutes of arrival. Adjust approach pattern to Vector 045 to utilize terrain shielding. Roger, Nimitz Control. Adjust into Vector 045. Maya watched the radar tracks as the helicopters battled headwinds that slowed their progress to a crawl. What should have been a 45-minute flight was taking nearly twice as long, burning precious fuel and reducing the time available for evacuation operations. The first real challenge came as the helicopters approached Hospital Site Alpha. The winds were even stronger than predicted, creating dangerous turbulence in the planned approach corridor. Nimitz Control, this is Mercy Lead. Approach corridor is experiencing severe wind shear. Unable to maintain stable approach. Requesting alternate vectors. Maya studied her terrain maps and the real-time weather data. Mercy Lead, descend to 500 feet and proceed to waypoint Charlie. There's a ridge line that will provide wind protection if you approach from the northwest. It was an unconventional solution, requiring the helicopters to fly lower than standard protocols allowed in such conditions. But Maya had anticipated this contingency, studying the terrain features around each hospital to identify natural wind breaks. Descending to 500 feet, proceeding to waypoint Charlie, Mercy Lead confirmed. For the next 6 hours, Maya directed the most complex humanitarian evacuation in recent naval history. As conditions deteriorated further, she continuously adapted, modifying procedures and creating new approach patterns based on real-time conditions. When Hospital Site Bravo lost power and communications, she coordinated a ground team insertion to establish visual landing markers. When fuel concerns threatened to strand aircrew at Hospital Site Charlie, she developed a midpoint refueling operation using the USS Princeton as a temporary platform. Throughout it all, Her voice remained calm and steady over the communication systems, a fixed point of certainty in the chaos of the typhoon. Mercy Flight, adjust heading 10 degrees starboard. Wind shifting in your sector. Princeton LSO, prepare for emergency recovery of Mercy 7. Patient condition requires immediate medical intervention. All units, implement Weather Protocol Delta. Typhoon Eyewall has shifted course. By nightfall, as the full fury of Typhoon Mikasa began to engulf the Philippines coast, the final helicopter touched down on the Nimitz's heaving deck. Against all odds, against what experienced aviators had deemed impossible, the evacuation was complete. 347 patients, including 56 in critical condition, had been safely transported from the path of the storm. Maya stood on the LSO platform, watching the final helicopter being secured against the increasing winds. The rain lashed against her face, and the carrier pitched heavily in the growing swells, but she barely noticed. Her focus remained on the mission until the very last moment. Only when Captain Harrison's voice came over her headset did she finally allow herself to exhale. Commander Patel, report to the bridge. All aircraft recovered. Mission complete. On the bridge, she found not just Harrison but Admiral Hayes and the senior medical officer, Commander Lin. 347 patients evacuated. Without a single casualty or aircraft incident, Hayes stated, her voice filled with something Maya had never heard from the Admiral before: awe. In conditions that, by every manual and regulation in naval aviation, should have grounded all aircraft. Commander Lin stepped forward. The first patients have already been stabilized and transferred to the medical bay. Without this evacuation, we estimate at least 120 would not have survived the typhoon. Maya felt the weight of the day's events finally settling on her shoulders. The credit belongs to the pilots and medical teams, ma'am. They executed flawlessly in impossible conditions. They executed your plan, using your protocols, under your direction, Harrison said firmly. What you accomplished today goes beyond impressive, Commander. It redefines what's possible in naval aviation. Admiral Hayes nodded in agreement. The Secretary of the Navy may have missed his visit, Commander, but I can assure you he'll be hearing about Operation Steadfast Mercy in extraordinary detail. 3 months later, Lieutenant Commander Maya Patel stood at attention in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes. Before her, the Secretary of the Navy prepared to pin the Distinguished Flying Cross on her uniform, an award rarely given to non-pilots and almost never for humanitarian operations. For extraordinary achievement while participating in aerial flight, the Secretary read from the citation. Commander Patel's. When things get rough. The training session that afternoon was unlike anything the LSO teams had experienced before. Maya had developed a new approach that combined simulator work with real-time decision-making exercises. You'll be facing conditions that degrade progressively, she explained to the first group. The scenario starts with standard parameters, then gradually introduces complications, wind shifts, deck motion, aircraft emergencies, communications failures. The goal isn't to stick to the textbook, but to develop adaptive strategies when the textbook no longer applies. Lieutenant Commander Chun, the pilot whose life Maya had saved as the first recovery during the hurricane, was observing the training as part of her new role as Squadron Safety Officer. What you're teaching them goes beyond LSO procedures, Chun commented as they watched the officers work through the scenarios. You're teaching them how to think under pressure. That's exactly it, Maya agreed. When everything goes wrong at once, procedure alone won't save you. You need a mindset that embraces the chaos instead of fighting it. Chun nodded thoughtfully. You know, in flight school, they taught us that the most dangerous pilots aren't the ones who lack skill. They're the ones who lack imagination. They can't picture what might go wrong, so they're blindsided when it happens. The same applies to LSOs, Maya said. If you can't imagine the deck pitching 15 degrees while crosswinds hit 60 knots, and an aircraft declares an emergency, You'll freeze when it happens. But if you've mentally rehearsed it 1,000 times, then you have options, Chun finished. Even when there shouldn't be any. The training program quickly gained attention beyond the Nimitz battle group. 2 weeks into the deployment, Maya received word that officers from 3 other carrier groups would be temporarily assigned to her team to learn the new protocols. Admiral Hayes had taken a personal interest in the program, ensuring it received priority funding and support. "You've started something important here, Commander," Harrison told her after reviewing the first progress reports. "The Hurricane. Recovery procedures are being implemented across the fleet. They're already calling it the Patel Protocol at Naval Aviation School's command." Maya was uncomfortable with the recognition, but she understood its importance. For too long, carrier aviation had emphasized speed and flash over methodical preparation. If attaching her name to the new procedures helped change that culture, she would accept it. The true test came 6 weeks later when the Nimitz battle group encountered another severe weather system in the South China Sea. Though not as extreme as the hurricane conditions, the storm still created challenging recovery operations with high winds and heavy seas. Maya supervised from the LSO platform as her newly trained teams handled the recoveries. They weren't perfect. Nothing ever was in carrier aviation. But the difference from before was striking. The LSOs communicated clearly, anticipated changing conditions, and made decisions based on actual conditions rather than hope for improvements. Viper 311, this is Nimitz LSO. Wind shifting right to left in your approach corridor. Add 5 knots and prepare for turbulence at 3/4 of a mile. Maya watched with quiet pride as Lieutenant Rivera once, Quinn's protege, guided the fighter to a perfect recovery despite conditions that would have resulted in a wave-off just months earlier. "Excellent call on the wind shift," Maya told her afterward. "How did you know it was coming?" Rivera smiled. "I was watching the water pattern off the port bow. You can see the wind lines changing direction about 15 seconds before they hit the approach corridor, just like you taught us." That evening, Maya received unexpected news. Captain Harrison had been summoned to her office, an unusual reversal of normal protocol. "The Secretary of the Navy is visiting the battle group next week," Harrison informed her. He specifically requested a briefing on the hurricane recovery protocols and the advanced weather recovery training program. Maya felt a momentary panic. "Sir, I'm not. You're exactly the right person for this," Harrison interrupted. "No one else can explain what happened that day or why the new protocols matter. This isn't about politics or visibility, Commander. It's about saving lives." As Harrison left, Maya sat alone in her small office, contemplating how dramatically her career had changed in just a few months. She'd gone from being the overlooked, overly cautious LSO to developing protocols that were being implemented throughout the fleet. Her methodical approach, once dismissed as too slow and careful, was now being recognized as the foundation of a new standard in carrier aviation safety. Her satellite phone rang, her younger sister calling from their parents' home in Michigan. "Hey, I just saw a feature about you on the Naval Aviation website," her sister said excitedly. "Mom and Dad are telling everyone in town about you, though they still don't really understand what you actually do." Maya laughed. "I help planes land on ships." "That's what you always say, but from what I'm reading, you're revolutionizing how the entire Navy operates in bad weather. The article called you the architect of the most significant advancement in carrier recovery operations in decades. That's a bit exaggerated, is it? The pilots whose lives you saved probably don't think so." After the call ended, Maya stepped outside onto the flight deck. The night was clear, stars stretching across the vast Pacific sky. In the distance, she could hear the familiar sound of aircraft engines as the evening patrols returned to the carrier. Tomorrow she would train another group of LSOs, teaching them the importance of preparation, about the difference between confidence and competence, about the quiet satisfaction that comes from doing your job well, regardless of recognition. Some would listen, some would learn, and maybe when their moment came, they would be ready. Maya had learned something important during her journey from overlooked backup LSO to respected instructor. Recognition wasn't the point. The point was being ready to serve when called upon, regardless of the circumstances or the audience. She returned to her stateroom and opened her logbook to a fresh page. At the top she wrote, Day 47, Commander. Maya Patel, Advanced Weather Recovery Training Program. Mission, prepare the next generation. Status, steady as she goes. Outside, an FSA-18 Super Hornet thundered across the deck, catching the third wire in a perfect recovery. Maya smiled to herself, another pilot safely home. In a world that often confused noise with substance and flash with competence, she had found her place as the quiet professional who was always ready when ready mattered most. And that, she realized, was exactly where she belonged. The morning of the secretary's visit dawned clear and bright, a rarity in the typically turbulent South China Sea. Maya had spent the night finalizing her presentation on the hurricane recovery protocols, distilling complex procedures into clear, actionable principles that even non-aviators could understand. She dressed in her service khakis, making sure every detail was perfect. As she pinned on her newly awarded Navy Achievement Medal, she reflected on how strange it felt to be the center of attention after years of working in the background. The ship's intercom crackled to life. Commander Patel, report to the captain's ready room. When she arrived, Maya was surprised to find not just Captain Harrison, but Admiral Hayes and several other senior officers she didn't recognize. They were gathered around a weather display showing a massive tropical depression forming east of the Philippines. Commander, Harrison said without preamble, we have a situation developing. Typhoon Mikasa has intensified rapidly overnight. Current projections put it on course to hit the Philippines in 48 hours as a Category 4 or 5 storm. Admiral Hayes picked up the briefing. The Secretary's visit has been postponed. Instead, we're being tasked with emergency evacuation operations. The Philippines government has requested immediate assistance, evacuating medical patients from 3 coastal hospitals directly in the typhoon's path. Maya studied the weather data, immediately recognizing the severity of the situation. These conditions will exceed even the hurricane recovery parameters, she observed. Wind speeds at 120 knots, severe precipitation, and minimal visibility. Exactly, Harrison said grimly. And we'll be conducting helo operations from multiple ships, coordinating with ground crews who have minimal naval aviation experience, and evacuating critical care patients who can't be moved easily. Admiral Hayes looked directly at Maya. Commander, I'm placing you in charge of the entire aviation element of this operation. Your hurricane recovery protocols are about to face their ultimate test. For a moment, Maya felt the weight of the responsibility threaten to overwhelm her. This wasn't a training exercise or even a difficult recovery operation. This was a life-or-death mission involving hundreds of vulnerable patients and dozens of aircraft operating at the absolute limits of their capabilities. But then she felt something else, a calm certainty born of years of preparation. This was why she had been so methodical, why she had practiced emergency procedures until they became second nature, why she had developed the hurricane recovery protocols in the first place. I'll need full authority to select the aircrews and modify standard procedures as needed, she said. You have it. Exceptional airmanship, outstanding leadership, and unwavering devotion to duty reflected great credit upon herself and upheld the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. As the medal was pinned to her chest, Maya thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From being dismissed as too cautious, too methodical, to developing protocols that had saved hundreds of lives. From backup LSO to the architect of the most successful extreme weather operation in naval history, the hurricane recovery. Operation Steadfast Mercy. The Patel protocols now being implemented across every carrier in the fleet. None of it had come from seeking attention or recognition. It had come from years of quiet preparation, from believing that doing things thoroughly mattered more than doing them flashily, from being ready when readiness was all that stood between disaster and success. After the ceremony, Admiral Hayes approached her. "The Chief of Naval Operations has approved your promotion to full commander, effective immediately. Additionally, you're being offered command of the Naval Aviation Weather Training Center at Pensacola." Maya felt momentarily overwhelmed. "That's a position usually reserved for captains with multiple commands," Hayes smiled. "Sometimes the Navy gets it right, Commander. Your experience, your protocols, your approach to naval aviation needs to be institutionalized. We need every LSO, every pilot, every air boss in the fleet to understand what you understand about preparation and execution in extreme conditions." As Maya flew back to rejoin the Nimitz for her final weeks aboard, she reflected on the strange path her career had taken. The officers who had once laughed at her methodical approach now sought her guidance. The procedures that had once been dismissed as too cautious were now doctrine. But more important than the recognition, more meaningful than the medals or promotions, was the knowledge that her approach had made a difference when it mattered most. The families of those 347 patients would never know her name, but they had. Their loved ones, because she had been ready when ready mattered most. In the officer's wardroom, her final night aboard, the air wing gathered for an informal farewell. Captain Harrison raised a glass. "To Commander Patel," he said simply, "who taught us all that steady wins the day." Chief Martinez, now senior. Chief Martinez added her own toast. To the officer who reminded an entire fleet that it's not about how fast you land the plane. It's about making sure it lands safely every single time. As the gathering continued around her, Maya slipped away to the flight deck for one final look at the LSO platform where it had all begun. The brass plaque was still there, steady as she goes hurricane recovery platform. She ran her fingers across the engraved letters, smiling slightly. In a few days, she would be in Pensacola, training the next generation of naval aviators, embedding her lessons into the very fabric of naval aviation culture. The Navy would always have its share of flashy, confident officers making dramatic gestures and bold claims. But perhaps now they would be balanced by those who understood that true excellence comes not from speed, but from precision. Not from charisma, but from competence. Not from talking about readiness, but from being ready. Maya looked out across the darkened flight deck to where the ocean met the night sky. Somewhere out there, storms were brewing, challenges were forming. Moments of crisis were developing that would test the next generation of naval aviators. And because of what she had started here, they would be ready. Steady as she goes. Commander Maya Patel stood before the largest class in Naval Aviation Weather Training Center history. 64 aviators from 8 different nations filled the auditorium at Naval Air Station Pensacola, all there to learn the extreme weather recovery protocols that had been developed from her experiences on the Nimitz. The training program had been Admiral Hayes's vision, a formal recognition that what Maya had accomplished wasn't just exceptional airmanship, but a new standard for how complex naval aviation operations should be conducted in challenging conditions. The investigation into the hurricane recovery incident had resulted in sweeping changes to LSO selection criteria, training requirements, and mission planning protocols. What had begun as one officer's insistence on thorough preparation had evolved into a movement that was transforming naval aviation safety across the fleet. "The first thing you need to understand," Maya told her students, "is that standard procedures will only carry you so far. When conditions exceed your training parameters, you need to rely on experience, judgment, and the confidence that comes from being thoroughly prepared." In the front row, Lieutenant Sophia Chun, a promising young LSO fresh from flight school, raised her hand. "Commander, how do you develop that kind of judgment if you don't have the experience yet?" It was an insightful question that cut to the heart of the challenge. "You start by taking every training evolution seriously," Maya replied. "You study weather patterns until you can predict turbulence before your instruments show it. You practice emergency procedures until they become muscle memory. And you never assume that because something worked in the simulator, it will work the same way on a pitching flight deck in 50-knot winds." The class nodded, taking notes. These weren't the overconfident young officers who had dismissed her approach a year ago. Word of the hurricane recovery and Operation Steadfast Mercy had spread throughout naval aviation communities worldwide. Her reputation now attracted serious students who wanted to learn from someone who had proven herself under the most challenging conditions imaginable. After the session, Maya walked across the training grounds toward her office in the administration building. A row of advanced flight simulators had been installed specifically for her program, each capable of replicating the extreme conditions encountered during both the hurricane recovery and Operation Steadfast Mercy. Admiral James Reichert, commander of Naval Air Forces, intercepted her near the Operations Center. The 4-star admiral had flown in specifically to observe the training program firsthand, a testament to how seriously the Navy now took Maya's methods. "Commander Patel," he said, falling into step beside her, "I observed your lecture this morning. Impressive group you've assembled." "Thank you, sir. They're eager to learn." "As they should be. What you're teaching them could be the difference between disaster and success when they face their own extreme weather scenarios." They walked in silence for a moment before Reichert continued. "I've just come from a meeting with the Chief of Naval Operations. The Patel protocols are being implemented across all carrier groups effective immediately. Additionally, LSO qualification requirements are being updated to include demonstrated proficiency in severe weather recovery operations." Maya absorbed this news with quiet satisfaction. These were the changes she had advocated for after the hurricane recovery changes that would ensure future LSOs were better prepared for the challenges they would inevitably face. "There's more," Reichert added. "We're establishing a new position, Director of Aviation Weather Operations, responsible for developing and implementing advanced training across all naval aviation communities. The CNO wants you for the job." Maya stopped walking, surprised by the offer. "Sir, that's a captain's billet. Which is why your promotion package is being expedited. The selection board meets next month. The Navy needs your expertise at the highest levels, Commander." As Reichert continued toward the administration building, Maya stood alone, contemplating the remarkable turn her career had taken. Just 18 months ago, she had been the overlooked LSO relegated to backup duty. Now she was being fast-tracked for promotion to captain and offered a position that would allow her to reshape naval aviation training throughout the fleet. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had never sought advancement through the typical channels of networking and political maneuvering. Instead, she had focused on mastering her craft, on being thoroughly prepared for whatever challenges came her way. And in the end, that dedication had carried her further than any amount of self-promotion ever could. Her satellite phone buzzed with a message from now Senior Chief Martinez. "Just heard the news about the director position. Nobody deserves it more. The fleet will be safer with you at the helm." That evening, Maya returned to her quarters to find a package waiting outside her door. Inside was a beautifully crafted ship's clock with her name engraved on a brass plate. The accompanying note was signed by all 24 helicopter pilots who had participated in Operation Steadfast Mercy. "Commander Patel, this timepiece is to remind you that when seconds counted, your lifetime of preparation made all the difference. What you did for us was more than exceptional leadership. It was a lesson in what it means to be a naval aviator." Thank you for showing us that quiet competence beats loud confidence every time. Fair winds and following seas. Maya sat in her living room, holding the clock and reflecting on the strange path that had brought her here. A year ago, she had been the forgotten LSO, the officer everyone overlooked when important assignments were handed out. Now she was responsible for training the next generation of naval aviators with the authority to ensure they would be ready for whatever challenges they might face. Her phone rang, her father calling from Michigan. "I saw the news about your program on the Navy website," he said proudly. "Your mother has been showing everyone in the neighborhood." Maya laughed. "It's just a training program, Dad. That's not what the article said. It called you the architect of a fundamental shift in naval aviation safety culture. Journalists tend to exaggerate. Do they? The pilots whose lives you saved probably don't think so." After the call ended, Maya stepped outside onto her small porch. The sun was setting over Pensacola Bay, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the distance, she could hear the sound of training aircraft as they practiced touch-and-go landings. Tomorrow she would teach another class of aviators about the importance of preparation, about the difference between confidence and competence, about the quiet satisfaction that comes from doing your job well, regardless of whether anyone notices. Some would listen, some would learn, and when their moment of crisis inevitably came, they would be ready. 6 months into her tenure as Director of Aviation Weather Operations, Maya received an unexpected visitor. Commander Jackson Quinn, her former rival from the Nimitz, appeared in her office doorway, now wearing the insignia of an instructor at the Naval Test Pilot School. "Commander Patel," he said, the old swagger replaced by genuine respect. "Thank you for making time to see me." "Of course, Commander Quinn. What brings you to Pensacola?" Quinn placed a folder on her desk. "I've been developing new approach procedures for the F-35C in severe weather conditions. The Test Pilot School believes they could be incorporated into your protocols." Maya opened the folder, scanning the technical specifications with a practiced eye. The procedures were innovative, combining elements of her own methods with new techniques specific to fifth-generation fighter aircraft. "These are impressive," she acknowledged. "You've clearly put significant thought into the crosswind limitations." "I had a good teacher," Quinn replied. "Nothing focuses the mind quite like watching someone else succeed where you failed." There was no bitterness in his voice, only a hard-won humility that Maya understood all too well. "We all fail sometimes, Jackson. What matters is what we learn from it." Quinn nodded slowly. "I've learned a lot. Mostly that being the fastest or the flashiest doesn't count for much when lives are on the line. What counts is being prepared for the worst while hoping for the best." As Quinn left, Maya reflected on how completely the culture had changed. Officers who had once prioritized style over substance were now championing thorough preparation and methodical planning. The pendulum hadn't swung entirely. Naval aviation would always attract its share of daredevils and risk-takers, but there was now a growing recognition that true excellence required both boldness and careful preparation. The real test of this cultural shift came 8 months later, when Carrier Air Wing 11 encountered severe weather during deployment in the Mediterranean. Using the Patel protocols, the LSO team successfully recovered 37 aircraft in conditions that would have grounded operations just 2 years earlier. Not a single aircraft was damaged, not a single pilot injured. Admiral Hayes called personally to share the news. "The Air Wing commander credits your training program entirely," Hayes reported. "Said his LSOs were quoting you throughout the recovery operations. Steady as she goes has become something of a mantra across the fleet." Maya smiled at that. "The protocols work because they're based on reality, not theory. They reflect what actually happens when naval aviation meets extreme weather." "There's more," Hayes continued. "The NATO Supreme Allied Commander was aboard observing operations. He's requested that your protocols be implemented across all allied naval aviation forces. You'll be traveling to Brussels next month to brief the NATO command structure. The NATO assignment was just the beginning. Over the next year, Maya found herself briefing naval aviation commands around the world, from the Royal Navy in Great Britain to the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force. Each presentation, each training session further solidified the principles she had developed during those crucial moments on the Nimitz. At the Tailhook Association's annual symposium, Maya delivered the keynote address to over 3,000 naval aviators, the first LSO ever invited to do so. Her speech, titled "When Seconds Count, Preparation Meets Opportunity," received a standing ovation from the assembled pilots and aviation leaders. "The most dangerous phrase in naval aviation," she told them, "is 'we've always done it this way.' The second most dangerous is 'I'll figure it out when I get there.' Excellence isn't improvised in the moment. It's built through thousands of hours of deliberate practice and thorough preparation." After the symposium, a group of junior officers approached her, eager for advice on advancing their careers. "What's the secret to success in naval aviation?" one lieutenant asked. Maya considered the question carefully. "There is no secret," she finally replied. "Just the daily discipline of doing ordinary things extraordinarily well. Be thorough when others are hasty. Be prepared when others are cavalier. Be steady when chaos erupts around you." "But what about standing out?" another officer pressed. "Getting noticed by the right people?" "The right people notice results," Maya said simply. "Focus on excellence, and recognition will follow. Focus on recognition, and excellence will always remain just out of reach." It was a lesson she had learned through hard experience, one that ran counter to the conventional wisdom that had dominated naval aviation culture for generations. But the Hurricane Recovery and Operation Steadfast Mercy had proven her approach correct in the most dramatic way possible. On the 20th anniversary of her commissioning as a naval officer, Captain Maya Patel stood on the flight deck of the USS Gerald R. Ford, the Navy's newest and most advanced aircraft carrier. She had been invited to observe flight operations as part of an assessment of how the Patel protocols were being implemented across the fleet. The ship's air boss, Commander Elena Martinez, Maya's former chief from the Nimitz, greeted her with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Captain. It's an honor to have you with us." "The honor is mine, Commander Martinez. Congratulations on your commission." Elena nodded appreciatively. "Couldn't have done it without your recommendation. Not many enlisted personnel make the jump to commissioned officer at my age. The Navy needs leaders who understand that theory and practice aren't always the same thing," Maya replied. "No one knows that better than you." As they walked toward the primary flight control station, Maya noticed something that made her stop. The entrance to Flight Ops bore a small plaque with a familiar phrase, "Steady as she goes." "That's on every carrier in the fleet now," Elena explained. "Admiral Reichert made it standard after Operation Steadfast Mercy. Says it reminds everyone what matters most when things get rough." Flight operations that day were routine by design, a demonstration of how Maya's protocols had been integrated into everyday procedures, not just emergency situations. She watched with quiet pride as LSOs guided aircraft to perfect landings. Their communications crisp and precise, their approach patterns reflecting the methods she had developed. "What you're seeing is just the surface," Elena commented as they observed from flight control. "The real change is in how we prepare. Every LSO now studies weather patterns the way you taught us. Every recovery operation is planned with multiple contingencies. Every pilot knows that when conditions deteriorate, we have protocols that work." Later, in the officer's wardroom, Maya found herself surrounded by young aviators eager to meet the woman whose methods had transformed naval aviation safety. Their questions were thoughtful, focused not on war stories or dramatic rescues, but on the fundamentals of preparation and execution. "Captain, how do you balance thoroughness with time constraints?" asked one young lieutenant. "You make thoroughness a habit," Maya replied. "When checking equipment becomes as automatic as breathing. It doesn't take extra time, it's just what you do." "What's the most important quality in an LSO?" asked another. "The ability to stay calm when everyone else is panicking," she said without hesitation. "And that comes from knowing you've prepared for even the worst scenarios." As the gathering continued, Admiral Reichert joined them, now serving as commander of the U.S. Fleet Forces Command. "I've been reviewing the safety statistics since the implementation of your protocols, Captain," he announced to the group. "Accident rates during extreme weather operations have decreased by 78%. That represents dozens of aircraft preserved, and, more importantly, numerous lives saved." The room fell silent as the significance of those numbers sank in. "But the most impressive statistic," Reichert continued, "is this: successful recovery. Rates in conditions previously considered non-operational have increased by 94%. We're now safely flying and recovering aircraft in weather that would have grounded entire air wings just 3 years ago." He raised his glass in a toast to Captain Patel, who taught an entire fleet that being steady is more valuable than being flashy, that preparation beats improvisation, and that the quiet professionals often make the loudest impact. That evening, as the carrier steamed through calm seas under clear skies, Maya stood alone on the LSO platform, remembering the hurricane conditions that had changed the course of her career. So much had changed since that day: new technology, new aircraft, new geopolitical challenges, but the fundamental principles she had championed remained constant. Excellence required preparation. Preparation required discipline. Discipline required the courage to prioritize substance over style, even when doing so meant being overlooked or underestimated. A young LSO approached hesitantly, clearly nervous about interrupting her thoughts. "Captain Patel, I just wanted to say thank you. Your protocols saved my brother's life last year during Operation Northern Light. He was piloting an F-35 when they hit unexpected weather over the Norwegian Sea." Maya smiled warmly. "I'm glad he made it home safely, Lieutenant. But I didn't save him. The LSO who guided him to recovery did." He says the LSO kept repeating something you taught them. "Focus on the next 60 seconds, not the last 30. Maya nodded, recognizing one of her fundamental principles. In crisis situations, dwelling on past mistakes only compounded the danger. What mattered was clear-eyed focus on the immediate challenge. Your brother made it back because he trusted his training and his LSO. That's how the system is supposed to work." As the lieutenant returned to his duties, Maya reflected on all the lives touched by the principle she had championed, not just the dramatic rescues during hurricane recovery and Operation Steadfast Mercy, but the countless routine recoveries, made safer through better preparation and training. The next morning, as Maya prepared to depart the carrier via COD aircraft, Admiral Reichert approached with unexpected news. "The Secretary of the Navy has approved your nomination for flag rank, Captain. You'll be pinning on your first star next month as the youngest female Rear Admiral in Naval Aviation history." Maya felt a moment of profound gratitude mixed with a sense of responsibility that nearly overwhelmed her. "Thank you, sir. I'm honored by the confidence the Navy has placed in me." "It's not about confidence, Maya," Reichert said, using her first name for the first time in their professional relationship. "It's about results. What you've accomplished has transformed naval aviation in ways that will save lives for generations to come." As the COD aircraft carried her away from the carrier, Maya watched the massive ship grow smaller on the horizon. 20 years ago, as a newly commissioned officer, she could never have imagined the path her career would take from overlooked LSO to the architect of a fundamental shift in naval aviation culture. She had never sought advancement through self-promotion, or political maneuvering. Instead, she had focused on mastering her craft, on being ready when readiness mattered most. And in doing so, she had risen further than she ever could have through traditional channels. Back at Pensacola, Maya found a new class of students waiting, the next generation of naval aviators, who would carry her principles forward. As she looked out at their eager faces, she recognized the awesome responsibility of shaping not just their skills, but their values. Naval aviation has always celebrated its heroes, she began. The test pilots who pushed the boundaries of what was possible. The combat pilots who demonstrated incredible courage under fire. The pioneers who transformed theory into practice. She paused, making eye contact with individual students around the room. But today, I want to talk about a different kind of heroism, the quiet dedication of being thoroughly prepared for whatever challenges you might face. It's not glamorous. It doesn't make for exciting stories at the officers' club. But when lives hang in the balance, when split-second decisions determine whether pilots return to their families, it's the foundation upon which everything else depends. One student raised his hand. "Ma'am, with respect, how do we balance thoroughness with the need for speed in combat situations?" It was the question that had defined the cultural tension in naval aviation for generations, the perceived trade-off between careful preparation and rapid execution. That's the false dichotomy that nearly cost lives during the hurricane recovery. Maya replied, "Thoroughness doesn't slow you down in a crisis, it speeds you up. When procedures are second nature, when contingencies are already planned, when your responses are automatic through deliberate practice, that's when you can act decisively without hesitation." She gestured toward the window where training aircraft could be seen practicing approaches. Every pilot out there wants to be the best, the fastest, the most skilled, the most daring. But the truly exceptional aviators understand that excellence isn't about individual moments of brilliance. It's about consistent performance under the most challenging conditions imaginable. After the lecture, as Maya walked back to her office, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From the lonely LSO platform during the hurricane recovery to the podium addressing future naval aviation leaders, each step had reinforced the same fundamental truth. In a world that often confused noise with substance and flash with competence, there would always be a place for the quiet professional who was ready when ready mattered most. That evening, she opened her journal to a fresh page and wrote, "As I prepare to accept flag rank, I find myself thinking not about the recognition or the accomplishments, but about the responsibility that comes with influence, the principles that guided me on that storm-tossed LSO platform must now guide an entire generation of naval aviators. The lesson remains the same. Be thorough when others are hasty. Be prepared when others are cavalier. Be steady when chaos erupts around you." For in naval aviation, as in life, it's not about who gets the credit, it's about who brings everyone home safely. Outside her window, the sun set over Pensacola Bay, casting long shadows across the cradle of naval aviation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new technologies, new threats to navigate. But the fundamental principles Maya had championed would remain as relevant as ever. In a profession that had always celebrated its daredevils and risk-takers, she had carved out a legacy based on something far more enduring, the quiet, consistent excellence that comes from being thoroughly prepared for whatever challenges might arise. And in doing so, she had transformed not just her own career, but the very culture of naval aviation itself. Steady as she goes. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become part of our everyday life stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.